IB Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown podcast. It's kind of an IB after dark. I wish, Vince loves doing these, but I'm going to do a little solo show tonight, and we're gonna have a very interesting conversation, all of us this evening. And here's what this conversation is going to look like. This conversation is going to be about looking at Notre Dame with both a backwards and forwards looking mindset. That's what we're going to discuss today. And what that means is basically um we're going to talk about the Ohio State game, but we're going to do it with a bit of a we're going to talk about the Duke game, I should say. But we're going to do it with a bit of a forward or backwards also and a forwards looking mindset. And so what I want to get into today is that. And so when you look at Notre Dame and you think about the Ohio State game and you think about where Notre Dame is right now heading into the Duke game, you start saying like, we learned a lot about the Notre Dame team this weekend. And it's been very interesting evaluating my own reaction to the game, evaluating the fan reaction to the game, and then there's different types of fan reactions. There's sort of the more rational conversations that we can have about football. There's the really emotional reactions that we'll have. I make a tweet today about Mike Mickens, and some guy starts going off about something that has nothing to do with Mike Mickens. Like it's Tuesday and you're still irrational. That's not really something that we can have a conversation about. But I understand a lot of it. But when you look at it, it's almost like sometimes we're missing a little bit of perspective about what happened on Saturday, and not so much to justify it because there's no excuse. Notre Dame should have won that football game, but more of saying, go, where is Notre Dame? And are they closer? Is it the same old team? And then what do they got to do to get there? Because there's two things that this Ohio State game, three things this Ohio State game taught us. Number one, I'm gonna up it. Four things. Number one, this is a really talented football team in the trenches and athletically. It's not where it needs to be completely, especially from an athleticism standpoint, or I shouldn't say athleticism standpoint, a perimeter standpoint. Couple other positions where it's just not quite where it needs to be to truly be elite, but still very good. This is also a football team to me that the depth obviously is there. We see the depth from this football team. And this is a team that's willing to fight. It's a team that's not afraid of the moment, all that kind of stuff wrapped into one. But then there's two other aspects about this football team that also go together. Number one is that Notre Dame is still not there yet. And there's still that almost program. And the difference between this game and some of those other almost games is you look back at this game and like with the Georgia game in 2017 and 2019, you look back at that Georgia game, you say, boy, Notre Dame played their butts off and they just weren't good enough. And some things this other team did kind of let Notre Dame stay in the game. And then Notre Dame had some areas where they were pretty good that they took advantage of. But you're like, just came out of those games and man, they're just not there yet. I had a different reaction come out of this game. This game was not only should they have beat Ohio State, but they should have beat Ohio State, convincingly. And beating Ohio State convincing, I'm not talking about blowing them out like the Michigan game. I'm talking about this should have been a 21-10, 24-14, 27-17 type of game. But Notre Dame couldn't take advantage of the opportunities that were there. The slow start that Ohio State had, due in part to the Notre Dame defense, the missed opportunities that Ohio State had, due in part to the Ohio State or Notre Dame defense, and they just couldn't get over that hump. They couldn't do what they needed to do to take that step. And when you look at the two programs, I saw a very evenly matched football game. I saw areas where Ohio State was better. I saw areas where Notre Dame was better. I thought Notre Dame was better than Ohio State for much more of that game, but they just kept letting Ohio State hang around. And those are things that you just can't do because Ohio State is a program that has shown that it can win these big games, right? It's been a while since they've done it. Ryan Day maybe necessarily hasn't done it, but these are players that are used to that spotlight. And when you look at Notre Dame, you know, you look at Notre Dame and where Notre Dame is right now, you say, boy, they've come a long way. They're deeper. They're still good in the trenches. They're more athletic. They just held Ohio State to under 20 points for the first time since I think something like 2016 or 2017 against Oklahoma, I believe, is the last time they were held under 20 points. But it still wasn't good enough. They're still that almost program. And why? It's because they didn't finish. And that's sort of that final step. So when I come out of the game and I start looking forward to Duke, I start saying to myself, like, look, this team has a chance to be really good. This team, not get one more recruiting class and boy, you're going to be pretty good, but it's this team. This team has a chance to be really good. But it's going to be about can you fix and address the things moving forward that cost you the Ohio State game. And that's what we're going to find out about this football team. Because when I look at Notre Dame from Saturday, and I look at what cost Notre Dame against Notre Dame, it's just there's so many different things. I'm going to have something on the premium message board tomorrow. I'm going to put all the stats out from the game, and there was 4 pass plays in the game, all to Chris Tyree, where it's like if you hit one of them or 2 of them, it completely changes the game. Completely changes the game. They didn't, and the game ended the way that it did. And it's looking at this team and looking at yourself as a program and saying, hey, if you can look in the mirror and say, boy, we fought our butts off, but it wasn't good enough, but it can be good enough. That's really what it comes down to. It wasn't good enough, but it can be. Then this program is going to take another step because you really, look, it's not true of everybody, but in a lot of instances, when you look back at great programs, and you look at their rise to greatness, a lot of times it took defeat and embarrassment to kind of wake them up a little bit, and to say, hey, look, you've got to, you think you're good, but you've got to prove a little something. I think I go back to Nick Saban's tenure at Alabama. He's a perfect example. First year he takes over in 2007, and he took over a team that went 6-7. They were 2 years removed from a 10-win game, but they weren't a great football program. They went 7-6 in the first year. Lost to Louisiana Lafayette, lost to Florida State, Georgia, got beat by Mississippi State, Auburn, LSU. They come out the next year, they start to turn things around. Beat Clemson in the opener, beat Georgia on the road, beat LSU on the road. 12-0, and they go get smacked in the SEC title game by Florida, and then they go get embarrassed by Utah in the Sugar Bowl, 31-17 in the game that wasn't that close. Well, how did Alabama respond? Well, they responded the next year by coming out and going undefeated, going 13-0 in the regular season, beating the teams they needed to beat, right? Beating Virginia Tech in the opener, beating Spurrier and South Carolina, beating LSU, beating Auburn on the road. And then they played Florida, they smacked Florida, and then they beat Texas to win the national title. That's how Bama responded to adversity. You look at the SEC power right before that, and you think of that Florida team that Bama had to overtake in 2009, and you look at their rise and what Urban Meyer did at Florida, takes over a 7-5 football team. First year goes 9-3. They get blown out by Alabama. They lose at LSU. They lose to South Carolina. They come out that next year in 2007, they come out that next year in 2006, and start off 6-0. Got a really big win over Tennessee. They get a big win over LSU. Then they go on the road and they lose to Auburn. Bounce back with a hard-fought win over Georgia, run the table, beat Arkansas in the SEC title, go on and win a national championship, right? That program won through adversity. And then the next year in 2007, the team kind of falls apart. They go 9-3 in the regular season, lose at home to Auburn, lose to LSU, get smacked by Georgia, go to the bowl game, get beat by Michigan. And then that team the next season comes out, wins a title. But even then, game 4, September 27th, they lose at home to a decent Ole Miss team, right? I mean, a team that went 9-4 that year, but a team they shouldn't have lost to. And how do they respond? Next week, they come out against Arkansas, win 38-7. Next week, they beat LSU 51-21. Next week, they beat Kentucky 63-5. Next week, they beat Georgia 49-10, so on and so on and so on, and just basically blew everybody else out. And we've seen examples of Notre Dame. When you think of the 2017 Notre Dame football team, and you think back to that loss to Georgia at home early in the year, similar loss where you're like, boy, you had your chances, you couldn't get it done. I think Georgia was the better team, but Notre Dame, played their butts off. And I remember the response by Drew Tranquill afterwards, and he said, hey, I really feel bad for the teams that we're about to play. And what do they do the next week? They come out against Boston College and, on the road, win 49-20, and it wasn't just that they won over a BC team that went to the postseason that year. It wasn't a great Boston College team, but it was the way that Notre Dame won. A little sloppy in the first half, but they came out and were physical, and in the second half of that game, they just absolutely obliterated Boston College. Ran for 515 yards. Next week, they on the road against a 10-win Michigan State team. Win that game 38-13. Wasn't that close. Blew out Miami of Ohio. Blew out North Carolina. Blew out number 11 USC. Blew out number 14 NC State. Blew out Wake Forest. Things fell apart at the end because, we know why. But that team responded well at the time. And when I look at this Notre Dame football team, we're going to learn a lot about this football team. Look at the program that they played this week. Ohio State. When was the last time Ohio State won a national championship? It's 2014. That's the last time Notre Dame won a national championship. Ohio State won a national championship. Well, how did that season go for Ohio State? Did they come out and blow everybody out and look like LSU 2019? No, it didn't. They struggled early against Navy in the opener. The next week at home, they got blown out at home by Virginia Tech. Lost by 2 touchdowns. And what did they do? Next week, they'd go win 66-0, 50-28, 52-24, 56-17. Go on the road, beat a really good Penn State team. Beat Illinois, blew out a number 5 Michigan State on the road, beat Minnesota on the road in a hard-fought game, smack Indiana, smack Michigan, blow out Wisconsin 59-0 in the Big Ten title game, then go to the postseason, beat Bama, and beat Oregon to win a championship, right? So adversity strikes. The question is, how do you handle adversity? Those are the questions that have to get answered. And then what do you do when these moments come? Do you just say, hey, we got beat, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing and go out the next week and win it? To a degree, yeah, you do. To a degree, you say, hey, look, the mindset that we have is the right one. We were emotionally ready to play. We are physically ready to play. This team is confident. And we battled back from a 10-0 deficit, showed no signs of, Buckeyes are up 10-0. We're going to fold. It's right next drive. Boom, 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 touchdown. Defensive stop. Boom, 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 touchdown. 96 yards. Boom. This team showed a level of confidence that we just haven't seen, a level of competence at times that we haven't seen at Notre Dame in a long time. But again, they couldn't finish. And so that's where you've got to look at it and you've got to say, okay, yes, we need to keep doing what we're doing as a program, but also be willing to look in the mirror and say, but we've got to be better here. We've got to make changes here. And it's not just about trying a little harder and being a little more focused. It comes down to there were fundamental flaws, some of which that we had seen before that didn't hurt you, that hurt you in this game. And we'll break down those things as we kind of go along in this. But the reality is Notre Dame is going to be tested immediately coming out of this game for 3 straight weeks. There can be no let up. And we're going to learn about this football team if they are capable of moving on past this, learning from this, and becoming a better football team, because that's the key. It's Notre Dame could be the same football team they were Saturday and still beat Duke. Right? Like that's some of the reactions that just kill me from fans. It's like, oh, you lost to Ohio State at home. You're going to lose to Duke and Louisville and USC, and it's like, really? Like, you guys know Ohio State's really good, right? That's a pretty good football team, right? They got a bunch of future NFL draft, first and second round draft picks on that roster, right? You guys know they're pretty good, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, that was a heck of a game. But it's for Notre Dame, it can't just be about out-towning Duke or out-towning Louisville and beating USC, who's pretty good. It's got to be about getting better, becoming a better team, fixing what cost you in this game, fixing the things that you look back on and say, this has been a bit of a problem now for parts of the season, except for maybe some really bad opponents. And we've got to find some answers. It also comes down to, you're now 5 games in. You've got an idea of how teams are defending you and how teams are attacking your defense and what teams are doing with you special teams wise, and saying, okay, this is how we respond. This is how we adjust. This is how we adapt as a football team. And if Notre Dame is able to do that, then this team has a chance to be special. If they don't do that, this will not be the last game that Notre Dame loses this season. That's how pivotal what this period is going to be for Notre Dame. They could win 2 of the next 3 games just because they're talented and they've got a good plan and they've got some good coaching in some spots, and this is a good football team. They can win 2 of the next 3. But to win 3 of the next 3, to go on the road and beat Clemson, and then to do something in the postseason, let's say you get a rematch against Ohio State, which is possible. Whether if you play Georgia, if you play Washington, if you play Florida State, if you play Texas, if you play some team that right now is really good, if you get one of those teams, you can't do what you did Saturday night against Ohio State and expect to beat all those football teams. You can't, because Ohio State's a really good football team. But you didn't just play, 08 Florida, 19 LSU, 2012 Bama. That's not who Ohio State is right now. I've said before the game, Ohio State in November is going to be a whole lot better than Ohio State in September. I've said that. So if you want to beat them in any potential rematch, you've got to get a lot better. And the concern that I have in defensively is that Notre Dame is such a veteran football team defensively that it can be a little bit more challenging to improve. And when I look at the defense and you say, hey, look, there's going to have to be maybe some personnel changes. There's going to have to be some philosophical changes in order to take that next step, because when you look at this defense, and again, the response to the defense has been wild. Notre Dame has a defensive coordinator who frustrates me at times, but Notre Dame also has a defensive coordinator that called a game that allowed his team to hold Ohio State to its lowest point total since, I believe, 2017, when they lost to a playoff team in Oklahoma, that held Ohio State to a pretty low point total. I mean, yards total. I mean, Ohio State had 366 yards of offense against Notre Dame. It's their lowest of the season so far. It's their lowest since the Northwestern game from last year. Iowa last year, who had an elite defense, held them to only six more yards. Notre Dame held them to 5.6 yards per play. They had 5.8 against Iowa last year. They had 6.4 and 492 yards against Michigan last year. Had a really good defense. In 2021, when they lost to Michigan, they had 27 points and 458 yards and 5.8 yards per play against a really good Michigan defense. And so when you look at what Ohio State did, I mean, look, again, Michigan, I'll give you all their totals against Michigan in the last however many years. Last year, 23 points, 492 yards, 6.4 yards per play. 2021, 27 points, 458 yards, 5.8 yards per play. 2019, 56 points, 577 yards, 7.5 yards per play. 2018, 62 points, 567 yards, 8.5 yards per play. 2017, 31 points, 350 yards, 5.6 yards per play. 2016, 30 points, 330 yards, 4.0 yards per play. So even in games where they held them to fewer yards, 2015, 42 points, 482 yards, 7.0 yards per play. And I go on and on 42 points in 2014 against Michigan, 42 points in 2013 against Michigan, 26 points against Michigan in 2012. And then you go back to the 2011 year where the last time the Michigan beat Ohio State prior to the most recent streak and still scored 34 points in that game. And yet people are calling for this guy to be fired. And it's a frustrating reaction to see that. But at the same time, Notre Dame's defense and Al Golden can't look in the mirror and say, we did our job. We held Ohio State to 17 points. We held Ohio State to 366 yards. We held Ohio State way into, season low in totals. We held Ohio State to fewer points than they'd scored since 2017. Can't do that because at the end of the day, for all the good things that Al Golden, that defense did, when the game was on the line and they needed one more stop, they couldn't do it. And there are reasons for it. And they're going to have to address those reasons. And my big question about this team moving forward is I actually think the offense is going to keep getting better. I think the offense is going to continue to adjust and adapt. There's a lot of young guys on offense that are going to keep getting better. There's more room for growth just from a player standpoint from now until the end of the year than there is on defense. And so in that regard, I think the offense is going to continue to get a lot better. And Jared Parker has shown a willingness already to do some things differently that maybe aren't quite working as well as they would like, to make some wrinkle adjustments and those type of things and dive in and say, hey, we're going to go out there and get better and those type of things. And so when you look at where Notre Dame is defensively, I have more questions about that. And that's what we're going to have to learn about this football team. So, the test is going to be there, and we're going to find out very, very quickly, how good this football team is going to be or can be, whether this football team's willing to make coach changes, whether or not the head football coach is willing to look in the mirror. Now, I know what he said publicly and defending his coaches and players, and that's what he's supposed to do. But privately, is he willing to sit down and have those conversations? He said something, if you watch the Wake Up the Echoes interview he did, he talked about how they had a hard coaches meeting. He says, my position group is the coaches. And we had I think it was hard meeting or something along those lines. And you hope that challenge was given, and you hope that challenge was received to where, hey, look, you've got to go out there and do a better job and make more plays. And you've got to put your guys in position to be better. And you've got to coach your guys up to be better. And all those things that your team needs to do to get better. And he's going to have to figure that out. And because ultimately he's responsible for it. You say, well, this position coach and this coordinator and this player should have made sure that they weren't true. Head coach needs to know that too. Head coach needs to make that change too. Head coach should have seen that before you're about to snap the second play, right? So this all comes down to he's the guy that ultimately, and we talked about this last night, and we talked about this in the post-game show, he's ultimately where the responsibility lies, and he's going to have to figure out ways to say, hey, look, this is what we need to do to change. We saw it last year. Can he make those changes again this year? We're going to find out if he's able to do that. And next, I'm going to talk about what exactly the changes that we need to see from Notre Dame are before we then dive into a look at Duke. So just a quick heads up, I am going to star something. I'm not going to do like a full mailbag afterwards, but there are some questions that I'm going to pull up here and address relative to kind of the conversation that we're having right now. So if you do put an MB on there, I'll try to see some of those and dive into that. So let's talk next about what Notre Dame needs to do in order to take that next step. For this 2023 team to take the next step. And next step meaning you're a better football team in the bigger moments, because we've seen this Notre Dame football team, when they are on, they're really good, but they've been on like start to finish, let's be honest, against some of the really inferior opponents. And they're going to have to get better in the bigger moments on both sides of the ball, but especially on offense. So we're going to talk about what Notre Dame needs to do to improve moving forward, and it's going to tie right into Duke. So this is kind of looking forward about what this Notre Dame team needs to do, and it's going to have to start against Duke. These things are all going to be relevant to what happens against Duke. And the first one for me is Notre Dame's going to have to be a better starting football team when you look at the bigger games. And if you look at Notre Dame through 5 games, they're actually averaging over 20 points in the first half. That's their season total so far this season. And I'm actually going to pull the statistic up. Notre Dame has scored 101 points in the first half, and they've scored 97 points in the second half. And currently they're averaging 39.6 points per game. But here's the problem. They have overwhelmed inferior opponents early in games, and they have not been a team that has been able to go out and get those same fast starts against the better teams on the schedule. And I heard, and this is going to be relevant to Duke. So when I was watching the Clemson game, at the time, the announcers made an interesting observation that last season, Mike Elko, in his first year at Duke, was 7-0 in games where Duke scored first. And so far this season, Duke has scored first in all 4 of their games, which means that when they score first, they're 11-0. And that's a team that starts fast in those moments. And Notre Dame is a team that needs to start fast against Duke. They're going to have to start fast against Louisville, USC, Clemson, and in those bigger games. And here's the numbers for you. Against Navy, Tennessee State, and Central Michigan, Notre Dame has scored 35 of their 38 first quarter points. Against Ohio State and NC State, the 2 best teams on their schedule by far, especially defensively, Notre Dame has scored 3 points. If you look at the first half as a whole, Notre Dame has scored 101 points in the first half. They're averaging over 20 points per game in the first half. They've scored 84 points in the first half against Navy, Central Michigan, and Tennessee State. So that's 28 points per game in those 3 games. Against NC State and Ohio State, they've scored 17 points in the first half, 8.5 points per game. It's not going to get it done. So in the bigger moments, Notre Dame's going to have to find ways to get points on the board early. Now, the thing is in the Ohio State game, they move the ball well. I mean, their first drive of the game, they go all the way down the field, they get inside the 20-yard line and fall short. The next drive, they get into field goal range, drive stalls, they fall short. Score or punt on your next possession. Don't get the ball again until the third quarter. Take your first possession into Ohio State territory, and then you turn it over on downs, and then touchdown. So Notre Dame moved the ball on Ohio State. They did. They moved the ball on Ohio State. It just comes down to you couldn't make the money plays you needed to come out and have success. And so Coach Parker and his staff are going to have to find ways to say, okay, we got 5 games of data, and you've got the 2 games of data that, okay, here's what's working against these teams, but it's not working against these teams. So what do we have to do as a team to come out and maybe have some more success early in games? They're going to have to figure that out. Is it our script isn't giving us enough chances to maybe, move the chains? Are we coming out early and doing too much personnel adjustment where, our guys can't come and get into an early rhythm? It takes a little longer in some of those big games for them to get going because it's not till really the second half that those guys really start having, more success. Because when you look at what Notre Dame has done in the second half of those football games, Notre Dame against NC State and Ohio State has been pretty good in the second half of those games. They've scored an average of 21 points in those 2 games. It scored 28 second half points against NC State and 14 against Ohio State. If Notre Dame would have matched their point total in the first half against against Ohio State that they did in the second half. They win going away, but they didn't. They couldn't do it. So you have to find out, are we as a staff maybe doing too much of this or not enough of this? And one of the things I think they need to look at is I love the fact that you're playing a lot of personnel. And I'm actually okay with a lot of early personnel getting in. But sometimes you have to wonder, are you doing a little too much early substituting to not let your dudes getting into the flow of the game against a better team like Ohio State, like an NC State, and like Duke will be? Because the numbers are what they are, folks. 3 points in the first quarter against Ohio State and NC State combined. 0 against Ohio State. Only 17 points in the first half against those two teams. And, of course, none against Ohio State. Duke is, to me, every bit as good as NC State, if not better defensively. They're very similar defensively. I believe Duke is better, is a little bit more sound. NC State's a little bit more athletic. Duke's got a touch more experience, in my opinion, for where they are defensively. But they're both very well-coached football teams that play physical. They go about it different ways. Tony Gibson's obviously a 3-3-5 guy. Mike Elko's a 4-2-5 guy. It's going to be a lot – they're going to look a lot more like Ohio State schematically and philosophically than NC State. But the point remains the same. They're not going to be an easy team to just come out and just boom, 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 put three scoring drives together on your first 3-4 drives of the game. That's not going to be easy. So do you need to maybe give your starters a little bit more run early in the game to where you're not taking, Chris Tyree and Tobias Merriweather off the field for half of your first possession, or maybe you're not taking Audric off as much. And so you can say, hey, look, there's different things you can do. If you want to do more 21 personnel or some 20 personnel in the first series, maybe take one of your tight ends off and put on a second running back. So where Audric's still in the game, but you're getting your running back some playing time. Maybe you start your second series with, one of your other running backs, because I'm all for getting Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love to continue to get them to football. I'm all for that. But you have to say maybe there's an even better way in which we can work this rotation into the game that'll allow us as an offense to start faster, because that's a big thing. They're going to have to start faster. They're going to have to start faster against Duke. They're going to have to start faster against Louisville, and they're especially going to have to start faster when they play USC in a few weeks. And so that's something they're going to need to look at. Number 2, the wide receiver play has to get better. Now, I'm not down on the wide receivers as much as maybe some people are, but I don't like some of the things that I've seen from them so far this year. They've certainly better coached than they've been in the past, but there's some areas where this group has shown me some of the same mistakes over and over and over again, or I shouldn't say mistakes, shortcomings over and over and over again that aren't talent related. Because you've got to be able to look at a unit and say, you know what, guys, they're just not good enough. They don't have the talent. You could watch the 2020 receiving core and be like, look, guys, they're not just going to go out there and start with Javon McKinley and Ben Skoranek, just start running by Alabama's corners. It's just not who they are. They're good football players, but they're not elite big time speed guys. They're not this kind of player. They're not Devontae Smith. They're not good enough there. You could look at the 2017 receiving core against Georgia and be like, look, guys, they're just not very good. I mean, Cameron Smith's he's just a solid player. Freddie Canteen's just a guy. Equanimous St. Brown's a good football player, but he's not a true number one for a championship caliber football team. He doesn't have the mindset to be a true number one in that type of moment. And it just wasn't good enough. When I watch this football team play, I don't view it that way. I think that they have the talent. I believe that the talent isn't necessarily being utilized to the best degree possible. And I'll have a little bit of a breakdown of that on the message board with some all 22 to back it up. But there's also some things where you've got to recognize what your talent is and maybe play a little bit more to it. And so when I look at the receiving core, it's not a bunch of burners. Chris Tyree's pretty fast. Tobias Merriweather has really good long speed. And so you've got to figure out more ways to utilize that speed a little bit more. But even with a Tobias, you've got to do things with him, with Jaden Thomas, with Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, where they've got to start better. You've got to start better in those situations. And when I look at Notre Dame and I look at their receivers and I see them not playing with a lot of urgency. And I've talked about this. Like here's the thing that the point that I'm going to make here. What I don't like is when, as an analyst, you look back after a loss and you start pointing at things that they need to do better and blaming things and saying, see, they should have fixed that if it's not something you had already said. So, like, if they get a recruit and he doesn't pan out, but I liked him coming out, I don't say, well, you did a bad job of evaluating that player. I hate doing that. I hate people that do that. It's like, well, if you thought it was a bad evaluation at the time, then you can talk right now because you were right. But in this instance, a lot of what we're seeing is stuff that we've talked about before. No urgency coming off of the line. The press release moves not being overly effective, doing things that are allowing DBs to get too much into your body. There need to be some things. Maybe they say, look, we've got to adjust our releases a little bit differently. Can we do more things to maybe get some movement going to where they can't then jam and reroute? There's all types of things you have to be willing to look at to say, we as a coaching staff have to do a better job of using our receivers in a way that is going to allow them to be more effective. And one of those things that has puzzled me, if I'm being honest, is they spent so much time in the spring and in fall camp especially really working up trying to get Chris Tyree really rolling in the offense, and then they don't use him a ton. On Saturday, Chris Tyree had 18 snaps, caught one pass for 25 yards, and should have had at least 2 or 3 more that should have gone for big plays. And I'll have that on the message board tomorrow, the premium board tomorrow. But when I look at Chris Tyree and I see a kid that had 18 snaps, and I see that Jaden Greathouse had 18 snaps, and then Rico had 37, Jaden Greathouse had 30, Tobias Merther had 47. You start looking back and Holden Stace has 22, and you start looking at it and saying, are there better ways that they can utilize their personnel to get maybe some of those matchups to where Rico, who's a very good player, and Jaden, who's a very good player, but they're similar. They're too similar. And saying we've got to match up better. We need to get Chris Tyree 8 to 10 more snaps a game. Are there things that you can do where maybe Chris Tyree and Jaden Greathouse are on the field together? Are there things you can do there? Those are all things that they're going to have to evaluate as you move forward in order to make sure the rotations are there. But then it also comes down to you've got to do more to utilize the strengths of those players. And I don't know that they're always doing that right now. And there's definitely some fundamental things that have gotten better, but need to still get a lot better and get better now. They're all things that can be improved now. They're not things you need to wait until the postseason to do. They're not things that you need to wait until you recruit better players to do. They're things you need to do now, to fix now, to address now. And if they can do that, the receiving play is going to be better. Last thing, the downfield passing game has to get better against the better opponents. And the fact of the matter is Notre Dame has not been good in this regard. They have not been good. Like against Ohio State, for example, they went 1 of 3 on downfield throws. Now, 1 of 3 plus a penalty, give them that. And then the one completion was to the tight end up the seam. They only went 3 of 4 against Ohio State for 53 yards on passes that were 10 yards, 10 to 19 yards. This is according to Pro Football Focus. Actually, let me pull up my numbers because I actually have my graph. Let me pull up my graph and we can actually get that going. So just give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up my graph because I just like mine better because I do it a little bit differently here. So actually, I don't have mine ready. So it's not mine's not completely updated yet. So we'll use Pro Football Focus's for now. So when you look at Pro Football Focus's numbers, they have Notre Dame going 4 of 5 on passes of 10 yards or more down the field. I have them so far this season. I have Notre Dame, or I mean, not this season, but against this game, I had them going, see, 4 of 7 is where I had them going. So where's 3, 4, 5? Okay, they actually had them 4 of 7 as well. 1 of 3, 20 yards or more, and then 3 of 4 and 10 to 19. Now, this is an area that in past games, Notre Dame has lit people up in this area. They've lit people up throwing the ball down the field, but it wasn't the better opponents. It wasn't necessarily. I mean, it was NC State eventually, but they've ripped up Navy and they've ripped up Central Michigan. They've ripped up Tennessee State in this regard. But what we haven't seen Notre Dame do is really have consistent success in these games against the better opponents. And that's something they're going to have to figure out. And the utter lack of effectiveness throwing the ball down the field against Ohio State, to me, is problematic. When you look at NC State, they went 2 of 4 throwing the ball 20 yards or more. They went 3 of 7 on throws 10 to 19. So on intermediate stuff, they went 5 of 11 in those games. Now, they had a couple big plays, but then you look at like what they did against Central Michigan, and on the deep to intermediate, they were 5 of 11 for 243 yards in that game. When you look at what they did against Tennessee State, for example, in those zones against Tennessee State, and this is using my data now that you can find on the message board, intermediate to deep, they went 6 of 8 in that range against Tennessee State. Against Navy, they went 6 of 8 again. So you're able to find some success throwing the ball down the field against the teams that aren't very good, but you're not really willing and able to do it down the field against the better teams. And then when they did have some shots, I felt that Sam Hartman, either one of two things is true. Either Sam didn't read it correctly, or B, he wasn't taught the read progression, the pre-snap and post-snap read progression in a way that took him to where it should go. And like I said, I'll have that breakdown tomorrow. But the moral of the story, the end game is the same, folks. They're going to have to be able to be more effective throwing the football down the field against the better teams on the schedule. And they were able to rip off a couple against NC State. But if you remember, 2 of Notre Dame's 3 biggest plays in that game were shorter throws, and one was on a busted play. They haven't had a lot of success actually on throws that have really traveled, far down the field, or even 20, 25 yards down the field. They're going to have to find a way to do that for this offense to really make teams pay, because the book is going to be on them. Like, the good teams are going to say, hey, look, if you just play your safeties back, Notre Dame won't throw the ball down the field. And there's things you can do, pre-snap and different things like that to kind of force the ball to go here. And the book is out on Notre Dame a little bit now. They're going to have to adjust and find more ways to do that. And if they can do that, I think this offense is going to be a much, much more effective downfield passing game. And that's going to be a key to Notre Dame having success offensively. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. Biggest thing for me is you've got to be more disruptive. This is one of those ones where the Notre Dame defensive line in the run game has been very good so far this season. From a filling gaps, holding up at the point of attack, just really being stout at the line of scrimmage. And that's why the run defense for Notre Dame so far has been really good this season. I mean, if you look at it right now, Notre Dame on defense has only given up 111 yards per game, 3.2 yards per play, and they have Navy on the schedule. And usually Navy runs those stats up, but Navy and Ohio State had the same amount of yards. Ohio State was the first opponent to even go for over 4 yards a carry against Notre Dame, and that was built around one carry that went for 61. Now, that play can't happen. Obviously, Notre Dame's going to have to do a better job in that instance. But, Navy comes out and goes for 245 and 299 in their next 2 games. And so Notre Dame's run defense so far in a lot of ways has been very good. However, it hasn't been a very disruptive run game. And in a lot of ways, it's allowed teams to stay in more manageable situations And we saw that with Ohio State where, yes, they weren't able to really run the football on Notre Dame incredibly well, but what they were able to do is put Ohio State in a lot more positive third down situations and fourth down situations where they could convert. And it's a lot easier to do that when you're in 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2 than when you're in 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12, more often than not. And so you're going to need to see more disruptions in the run game. That is something that I want to see. And then especially in the pass game. And look, I get what Coach Freeman's talking about. And he talks about how, yes, they haven't racked up a lot of sacks and all that, but they are getting a lot of pressures. And my response is sometimes, yeah, you're correct. I thought they did a good job of keeping Brendan Armstrong from getting comfortable in the pocket. I thought they did a pretty good job of Kyle McCord not really getting super comfortable at times. But then again, in the last drive of the game, in the 3 money downs, they weren't able to get pressure on him when it really mattered. And part of that is because they are not allowing their defensive line to be more effective pass rushers. And you could say, well, maybe they just don't have guys that can do that. Maybe that's true. But I don't know. I would say that you haven't really turned them loose to allow them to do that yet. And the disappearance in the pass game of Jordan Botelho has been especially concerning. And if you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers, and I don't have my numbers on the season yet because I don't have my numbers from Ohio State yet, but my numbers in the first 4 games are very similar to Pro Football Focus's numbers. But in 5 games this season, Jordan Botelho has 8 pressures. That's it, 8 pressures. And when you look at what he did last season, he had 10 pressures in the bowl game alone last season. And last year in 75 total pass rushes last year, 75 pass rushes on the entire season, he had 10 hurries, 2 hits, and 5 sacks, according to Pro Football Focus. This season, so that's 75 pass rushes on the season, 7 hits on the quarterback, sacks plus hits, 10 pressures in 75 pass rushes. This season, in 5 games, Jordan Botelho, it's loading, so just give me a second. But Jordan Botelho so far this season has 95 pass rushes. He only has 4 hurries and 4 hits on the quarterback. His pass rush success rate is incredibly low. And matter of fact, of the players who have had 20 or more pass rushes on the season, he is the 3rd lowest. Nana Osafo-Mensah and Junior Tuihalamaka are the only 2 with lower pass rush success grades than Jordan Botelho has on the season. And when you look at Josh Burnham, for example, in 21 pass rushes, Josh Burnham already has 5 pressures, 3 hurries, a hit, and a sack. And so when you look at that and you expand that out, they're going to have to do one of 2 things. Number one is they're going to have to find ways to get Jordan Botelho going. And I don't know what the answer is to that. I'm not going to pretend that I know, hey, if you guys do this, he's going to get going. I don't know what the answer is to that. But right now, your defensive line pass rush is almost exclusively coming from up the middle, except the occasional, good pass rush from Javonte Jean-Baptiste in a couple games. He's had a couple good games in a row now. Javonte Jean-Baptiste has 10 pressures right now, and Jordan Botelho has 8. So your 2 edge players, who's where your pressure is supposed to come from, on a combined 199 pass rush snaps, have got 18 pressures. When you look up the middle and you look at your defensive tackles, Riley Mills and Howard Cross, in 182 pass rushes, so that's 17 fewer than your ends, they've got 25 pressures on the quarterback this season. So 25 for your interior guys, only 18 for your edge players. And if you add Nana into that and Josh Burnham into that, that'd be 19, 24. If you take the next 2 defensive tackles and add your next 2 defensive tackles, you're talking about 35 for the interior guys. I mean, Gabriel Rubio this season has only played, let me find Gabriel Rubio's stats because I thought this was impressive. Gabriel Rubio this year's played 9 pass rush snaps. He's got 5 hurries so far. Jason Onye's played 31 pass rush snaps this year. He's got 5 pressures already. So your interior's giving you what you need. Donovan Heinisch has 2 pressures on 25 pass rushes this year. Your only guy that's given you really much of anything consistently on the edge has been Josh Burnham, and he played 4 snaps against Ohio State. And he didn't play a whole lot more than that against NC State. And so when you look at NC State, he played 9 snaps against NC State. So he's been your best on a per snap basis, and you're not playing him while your starter's getting all this time and he's not being productive. So you have to ask yourself, okay, is it maybe you need to keep Jordan fresher during the game? Are there things you're doing schematically where you're not playing to what he's good at as a passer? I don't know the answer to that. I think the snaps thing is something that I would strongly look at if I'm Notre Dame, where you want to keep him a little bit more fresh as you get through games. But at the end of the day, you're not getting much pass rush from your D-line as far as getting home to the quarterback. And to me, that's going to be one of the bigger problems because your starting defensive linemen right now have, 6, 11, 15 total hits on the quarterback so far this season. You're starting from your starting defensive line. That's 3 per game. Baptiste has 5, Patelho has 4, Mills has 4, Cross has 2. That's it. And that's just not enough. So yes, they're getting hurries, but they're not getting the real pressures that can be more impactful. And when you combine that with the fact that they're not very disruptive in the run game, you start seeing some of the reasons why, Notre Dame has been very good on defense, but you could see why they couldn't make some of those big stops in the big moments in the game on Saturday. And that's something that Notre Dame's going to have to get a lot better at moving forward. Is they're going to have to find ways to generate more pressure from the front. And I mean, pressures that hit. That's going to be the big thing. Pressures that hit. A couple more things on defense. Number one, the safety play has been very inconsistent. It's got to get a lot better. And they had some moments against NC State, but overall, the safety play this season, too many missed tackles. We've seen too many coverage mistakes, being out of position mistakes. There's been just too many of those moments of you're not doing your job, and it's costly. And it's not just one guy. Obviously, DJ Brown had the real big one with the missed INT. You had Ramon Henderson that had the bad misplay against on the 3rd and 19. He's got to do a better job. Just overall, the defensive secondary has to be better. They have to be better this season. They have to limit the pass game more. They have to do a better job of making more plays on the football. They have to do those things better. And so they're going to have to find some answers at safety. I think you have to be willing to maybe consider moving some guys there. I think you have to maybe consider how you're using certain players. You have to be willing to consider, look, the offense has said, hey, look, we got these really talented young kids. They don't know the whole offense, but when we put them on there, man, we're going to let them go play and let them go ball. And they've rewarded the staff with big time performances and clutch moments. At some point, the defense is going to have to say, do we get a Don Schuler going? Is that the step? Is it Antonio Carter? Is it maybe playing Thomas Harper more? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not trying to pretend that I have the answer, guys. But what I know is if the safety play doesn't get better and at least more consistent, this is going to rear its head again down the road. Because if your safety struggled against Ohio State, they're going to have a lot of problems against USC because USC has a better scheme and USC has a lot better quarterback. And that's no shot on Kyle McCord. You guys have heard me sing his praises plenty of times. But Caleb Williams is best quarterback in college football right now. And he's going to go at the Notre Dame safeties. And that's that's something that's going to have to get addressed here moving forward. And then the last thing ties into that a little bit. We're now 5 games in, and Notre Dame still has not shown a willingness to make the changes necessary to protect the middle of the field more. And that's going to have to change quite a bit over these next few weeks, because you're not going to be able to play the better teams in your schedule and win those football games when teams know if you need to play, run a crosser, run an over, run a seam, run something like that. And Notre Dame is going to play their nickel in a certain type of coverage that and they're not going to help them. And that's going to be something that's going to prove costly to Notre Dame here at some point in time if they're not able to go out and figure out ways to do that. And my thing is, when I look at the Notre Dame pass rush and I look at how much they're triggering the defense of the linebackers, those have got to hit home more. And when you look at the pressure success rates for the linebackers, they're pretty much on par or below what you are from the defensive line. So, for example, Pro Football Focus has a statistic where it talks about it's a formula that combines, hits, sacks, and hurries based on the number of times they rush. So Jack Kaiser on the season has rushed 18 times on the season. Maris Leofau has already blitzed 44 times this year. Jack Kaiser has blitzed 20, or J.D. Bertrand has blitzed 25 times this year. These are where they're pass rushing. Jalen Sneed's got 17, and Jack Kaiser has 18. So in 5 games, your linebackers this season have been triggered already 106 times. 106 times. And they've got a total of 9 hits on the quarterback. 1 sack. I'm sorry. I might be, I know I'm an offensive guy, but when you're blitzing your linebackers and they're only getting a hit on the quarterback 1 every 10 times, that's a problem. And you've got to ask yourself, are we really maximizing the way we use these guys? Are we really? You look at Maris Leofau. He's got 44 accounted pass rushes this season, 3 hits on the quarterback. J.D. Bertrand has 4 hits on the quarterback and only 25 pressures. Jack Kaiser's got 2 hits on the quarterback and only 18 pass rushes. And so you got to ask yourself, are we really using this kid and these kids the best way we can for them to be effective? And there were times on Saturday where like Jordan Patelho or Maris Leofau would kind of slant around and just stop right there, like almost where the line of scrimmage was. And it's like, you're not rushing the quarterback. You're not helping with underneath coverage. So what are you doing here? It's not them. You could tell that's what they were being taught to do because they've been doing this since early last year. So either they're still making the same mistakes over and over again, or that's what they're being asked to do. And that's going to have to get addressed, because you can't go through 5 games and have those kind of numbers where in 106 pressures, you've got a combined 9 hits on the quarterback. That's just not good enough. It's just not good enough. And when you look on the season, according to Pro Football Focus, they've got 5 sacks, 10, 11, 14, 15, 16, 20, and 23 hits on the quarterback. It's 28 hits on the quarterback in 5 games. That's barely over 5 a game. That's not enough, especially when you consider some of the teams they've played so far. That's not enough. And they're going to have to get better. And they're going to have to rethink how they're doing it. And so here's my thing. If you're going to be a team, because here's the thing, you don't have to be a heavy 50 sacks and 70 hits on the quarterback defense. I've broken this down about Georgia. Georgia's not that team. But if you're not a team that's going to get a lot of pressure where you're hitting the quarterback and sacking the quarterback and breaking up passes and being disruptive in that regard, then what you're going to have to do is you're going to say, maybe we rethink how we're doing this, to where maybe we use our linebackers and the rangy athleticism that they have to do more stuff in coverage, taking away some of the middle of the field stuff. Or maybe we take away the underneath stuff. Because my whole thing is this: you've got great cornerback play, Great cornerback play. Your nickel play has been pretty good this year. And you know, Thomas Harper got beat on X number of plays. I'm like, yeah, he did. But he's going against elite players, and he won some, and they won some. But the fact of the matter is that you can't leave him exposed that often against those players and expect him to come out and just eat those guys up. He's not Benjamin Morrison. He's not Cam Hart. And playing nickel is a different animal because you've got a lot more room to work with and a lot more room for receivers to work with. So there's a lot more room to cover across the field than there is as an outside cornerback, where teams just don't do a lot of that kind of stuff. And so you've got to think, are there things we can do with our linebackers where they're not really effective getting the kind of major pressures on the quarterback, where maybe we can say, hey, we're going to use these guys to get up underneath routes, mix that stuff up more, and then allow our pass rush to do more things to win. And so that's something I'd like to see Notre Dame strongly consider moving forward is you're not getting enough bang for your buck for the amount of times you pressure. When you trigger your linebackers as much as Notre Dame's triggered their linebackers, and over 100 pass rush, you've got 9 hits on the quarterback. And when you look at your linebackers, and they've only got 4 tackles for loss on the entire season, 4 tackles for loss from your linebacker position on your entire season. Notre Dame this season so far only has 19 tackles for loss in 5 games. That's it. That's it. 9 tackles for loss in 5 games. That ranks Notre Dame this year when it comes to tackles for loss per game, just to give you guys a glimpse of how bad that is. That ranks Notre Dame 130th out of 103 teams. There's 3 teams worse. Cal, Boston College, Sam Houston State, who's in their first year playing Division I football. So you are at the bottom in tackles for loss. So you're being aggressive. You're getting all these guys on the first level, but it's not resulting in the kind of pressures you need. And Cam Hart and Thomas Harper, DBs, tie for your team lead in tackles for loss. Right now, Notre Dame's secondary has combined for 5 of your 19 tackles for loss this season. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. So either A, you've got to regroup as a coach and say, we can't keep doing this if it's not going to get home and create more disruptives. So maybe we say, hey, let's let our front play more. You know, we'll be aggressive, you know, with our read and flows in the run game, but we're going to be willing to kind of mix up our coverages more, because I think what will happen is if you can take away some of the quick, intermediate, over the field type of stuff away from teams, then what that's going to do is that's going to allow your defensive line to have a little bit more time to make plays. It's going to force more incompletions, in my opinion, against better teams, and allow you to go out and be successful. Because, again, there's a lot of good things we've seen from the defense so far this year. You know, they've held opponents under 50% completions. They held Ohio State to 55.3. They've been able to create some disruptives, but not to the degree where it's really, really having this huge impact where when you project forward against the teams like USC and you get into the postseason, as teams get more film on what this team is doing. You saw Ohio State had a plan on that last drive on how to pick up the Notre Dame pressures. And that's partly why they went right down the field. So, yeah, it did some good things in the game. But there were also a couple times where you're lucky somebody made a play, because that guy gets through there, he's going to hurt you. Caleb Williams, there's a couple times where Kyle McCord tried to scramble where a more dynamic quarterback might have had a bigger play. And so, again, I'm not sitting there saying like this defense is bad, it sucks, and now Golden's terrible and he's got to go and all these other type of things. It really comes down to you've got to be able to say, hey, it's good, but is it good enough? Is it really what we need to be doing? Or do you just look at your stats and say, well, look at our numbers. Look at our stats. Our stats are really good. We rank here. We rank there. We're really good in these areas. And they are. I mean, Notre Dame pass defense right now ranks 6th in the country in fewest passing yards allowed. They rank 2nd in the country in quarterback rating. They rank right now, they are tied for 13th in fewest yards allowed per attempt. They currently rank first in the country in fewest passing yards allowed or fewest completion percentage. But here's what it comes down to. In the big moment against Ohio State, they went 3 for 3 throwing the football on 3rd and 10, 4th and 7, 3rd and 19. 3 for 3. You couldn't get it done when it mattered most. So, yeah, the numbers look good, but the number that matters most to me is that one at the end. And that's going to have to get addressed. And so, if you're in here saying, oh, Al Golden's got to go, that's just a nonsense comment. The defense is doing a lot of good things. The question is, can they make the changes necessary to do elite things? That's the question, in my opinion. Because if you're sitting there saying that a defensive coordinator for a team that right now, after playing Ohio State, is giving up 12.8 points per game, that's giving up 260.6 yards per game and 4.2 yards per play, has to be fired. We're not having a grown-up conversation. If you're calling for a coach whose defense ranks 15th in the country in scoring defense, ranks 7th in the country in total defense, and ranks 6th in the country in yards allowed per play, and they're one game away from being at the halfway point in the season, we're not having a grown-up conversation anymore. But we can have a conversation about, is it good enough to win a championship? Is it good enough to make the big stops in those big moments? That's the question, and that's what Coach Golden is going to have to fix, in my opinion. That's what Coach Golden is going to have to address and say, yeah, this is what I thought we're going to be, but we're just not getting enough bang for our buck. We need to make some adjustments because I think we can be even better, where we can not only rank here, but we can also become more disruptive. We can become more effective here, where we can maybe limit some of the number of plays that teams are running against us in certain situations. Those are all things that I would like to see Notre Dame, really work to improve on moving forward this season, especially as you kind of start to ramp up, because this was your first big test defensively, true test defensively. We said before they hadn't played anybody who was good on offense yet. We said NC State wasn't good on offense. Navy's not good on offense. Central Michigan and Tennessee State. Yeah, they did a good job against Ohio State, but the book is going to continue to get written on you, and teams are going to adjust. And are you willing to adjust and make those changes to say, we're just not quite there yet? And those are the things they're going to have to do. If they don't, then we'll likely see more of the same. If they do, then I think this defense can take this jump to another level and be really, really special. I do believe they're on the verge of it. They're disruptive up the middle. Their linebackers, when they're playing well, have been very disruptive. They're elite at corner. They are. I don't think they're putting their linebackers in the best position to be effective. You guys can do all the things you guys want to do as fans. Oh, bench this guy, play the freshman who's never played a meaningful down in the world. Yes, that's what we should do, guys. Take a defense that's giving up 12.8 points per game and 260 yards per game and just held Ohio State to 17 points, and bench your fifth-year linebackers and put in a bunch of freshmen. Good call. Like, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about this is the group you're working with. Are there some personnel adjustments you can make here and there at certain spots? Sure. But it comes down to the personnel you have is this. Are you really doing the things that are allowing it to truly maximize it? That's the question they have to ask. And it's not a massive overhaul. It's an adjustment. Maybe it's a volume of usage here, where right now we're using these pressures at a 65, 70% rate, where maybe if we use it at a 30% rate, it's teams are less prepared for it. And then maybe it starts hitting home more, because there's an argument to make that if you pressure less, and a perfect example is Jim Knowles with what he's doing with Ohio State this year. Jim Knowles is a blitz, bring pressure guy, but he doesn't have linebackers at Ohio State that are super dynamic pass rushers. And I know they were against Notre Dame last year, but they're more instinctive and smart and, let them read and then get downhill and and attack the football and do things like that. That's what they're better at. And so what Jim Knowles has done this year, and it's outside of his character for what he's always done, is he said, hey, I don't have those type of linebackers where I'm just going to, shoot them downhill and like Jalen Smiths and Jeremiah Usu-Koramoahs and things along those lines. I've got really smart, quality athlete guys that are physical and instinctive. So I'm going to let them flow to the read and flow and fly downhill. And so he's doing more of I'm trusting my guys. Now, they made some really good calls against Notre Dame, but a lot of their good calls to me were more dropping guys underneath, showing different looks and dropping guys underneath, where Notre Dame wasn't getting that kind of depth with their linebackers. Ohio State's guys were doing a better job at times of getting underneath some of the routes Notre Dame was trying to run, and Notre Dame linebackers weren't doing that. So that's what I kind of get down to is you had two really good defenses, and one guy was able to make the calls in the big moments to get stops, and the other guy couldn't. And that's the difference. And so to me, if you can say, hey, we're doing some really good things, but we're not there yet. How can we get there with this team and make the tweaks necessary? That's what Coach Gold needs to do. That's what Coach Parker needs to do. And if they can do that, protect the middle of the field, be more disruptive, get your safety situation figured out on defense, be better early in the game on offense. Because, earlier I said that Notre Dame has only scored 17 points in the first half against the two best teams they played, NC State and Ohio State. Well, guess what? The defense has only given up 10 points in the first half. So your defense is doing its job early in big games. Your offense needs to help your defense out in those situations. And then maybe some of those pressures start to get home because teams can't run the ball anymore. So there's all that type of stuff that goes together. And so to me, I want to see more of that. I want to see better receiver play from a technical standpoint. It's better than it was, but it's still not where it needs to be. And I want to see the vertical pass game. You got to figure some things out with the vertical pass game. And that's what Notre Dame needs to do. And if they do that, it'll help them beat Duke. If they do that, it'll help them beat Louisville and USC and the teams that follow. And maybe they get a rematch against Ohio State, and it'll give them a chance to help win those games as well. Let's talk about the Duke Blue Devils, Notre Dame's next opponent. I have to admit, I have really enjoyed what Duke has done this year. For you all that know me, have known me for a while, you know that I'm a big Mike Elko fan. I think Mike Elko is a really good football coach. But more importantly, I like Mike Elko as a person. I think Mike Elko is a good dude. I think Mike Elko is a guy that cares about his players. He's a guy that you look at and say, he does things the right way, in my opinion, in a lot of ways. And he inherited a Duke team that the year before he was hired, these are some crazy stats. You guys are going to like these stats. If you're someone who's a kind of a little bit of a stat nerd like me, I was doing the stat and I knew it was going to be something like this, but I didn't even know how bad it was going to be. But the year before Mike Elko arrived, Duke went 3-9, and their average margin of defeat was 28.5 points. They had 7 losses that were by at least 25 points. Mike Elko takes over. Duke goes from 3-9 to 9-4, and their 4 losses were by a combined 16 points. And their biggest margin of defeat last year was 8 points. And that was early against Kansas. They're off to a 4-0 start this year. Mike Elko, in 2 years at Duke, has gone 13-4. Excellent coaching job. His staff does a nice job. And he's got these kids playing at a high level. And he's not out there coaching a bunch of stiffs. That's the thing is Duke does not have great talent. They don't have talent that matches Notre Dame. But they've got good talent. And we've talked about this all offseason. Ryan and I have talked about Riley Leonard. We've talked about the receivers. We've talked about the D-line. Their secondary's got a couple transfers. They're helping out a lot. This is a quality Duke football team. We're gonna break down Duke a little bit, go over kind of where they've been so far, what they're doing, what makes them effective, and have a little bit of fun talking about the Blue Devils. I'm going to answer just a couple questions at the end, and we'll get out of here. So Duke right now is 4-0. Their last 3 opponents are not very good. Let's just be honest about that. Okay, they beat UConn this weekend, 41-7. UConn is 0-4. UConn's not a very good football team. They beat Northwestern the week before that by a score of 38-14. Northwestern's not very good, although I would argue Northwestern's a little bit better than I thought they were going to be. They're 2-2 right now. They beat UTEP in week 2, beat Minnesota this past weekend, although I've said I don't think Minnesota's any good. They're 2-2 right now, and their wins are over a bad Nebraska team that handed that game away and an Eastern Michigan team that played them into the second half in a competitive football game. And then they beat Lafayette in game 2. So you could say, well, they haven't really beat anybody any good so far. Yeah, but they beat Clemson in the opener, and that was a very good win. And it was a very hard-fought game. It was much closer than the 28-7. Duke kind of poured it on at the end. It was 13-7, and I think it was 13-7. And Clemson's inside the 5. They're about to score. They have a fumble on a handoff exchange. It gets run back for a touchdown. So Duke has done what they need to do. They had a great early season win. They haven't played very good teams the next 3 weeks, but you know what they've done? They did what a good football team is supposed to do. The teams aren't very good. They've beat them convincingly. And so, they were up 21-7 on halftime at Lafayette. By the time you get to the fourth quarter, it's 35-7. And it was a really rainy day. So it was a really nasty field. 17-7 at halftime against Northwestern. It's 31-7 going into the fourth quarter. Game wasn't even a competitive game in the fourth quarter. They were up on UConn this week on the road, 27-0 at halftime. It was 41-0 going in the fourth quarter. So since the Clemson game, they have not gone into the fourth quarter with it being a competitive game, and that's what good teams are supposed to do when they play inferior opponents. So got the early season win over UConn or over Clemson, and they've come out since then and played really, really good football. So this is a quality Duke football team that has legitimate talent, and they've gone out there and handled their business so far this season. When you look at sort of the individual breakdown of their games, we talked about the Clemson game. It was a I don't know if you want. It was a very interesting game. I thought Duke defensively was very stout in that game. But they allowed yards in that game. Clemson had 422 yards in that game. Duke actually got outgained, fought 422 to 374, although Duke actually had more yards per play. Both teams had lost 2 fumbles. Clemson also threw a pick in that game, so there were 5 turnovers in that game. It was a little bit sloppy. Clemson outrushed Duke 213 to 199. They outpassed Duke. Neither team did much as far as yards per attempt. Clemson was at 4.9, and Duke was at 5.1. But Duke made the plays in the fourth quarter they needed to make. They made the stops when they needed them. They ripped off a couple big plays and some clutch moments to help put that game away. When you look at the game against Lafayette, as I said, bad conditions. Duke doubled them up on first downs. They doubled them up on rushing yards. They almost tripled them up on passing yards. They outgained them 515 to 213. Pure dominance in that game. Honestly, could have been worse if it was a little bit better conditions. Same thing against Northwestern. It was a very convincing win. Duke had 268 rushing yards. Northwestern's 104. Duke outpassed them 219 to 163. Outgained them 487 to 267. Yards per play, 8.1 for Duke, 3.8 for Northwestern. So it was really not an overly competitive game, in my opinion. Duke, Northwestern's last touchdown came with a minute left. It was against Duke's backups. So, I mean, it was a very uncompetitive game for Duke. They were very, very, very much the better team that game. UConn did actually a pretty decent job of shutting down Duke's run game this past week. They held them to 74 rush yards. UConn actually outgained them 89 to 74. But Duke had the more effective pass game, 248 to 114, outgained UConn by almost 100 yards, or actually almost 120 yards, 322 to 203, had over 2 yards more per play. And so they were very convincing in that game. So they've been clearly the better team so far this season. And that's something that's going to happen. They've played clean football last 2 games. They have not turned the ball over last 2 games. They had an early pick. It's an early pick or an early fumble. I forget what it was against Lafayette. That early turnover against Lafayette, I believe it was a lost fumble. and turn the ball over. And that's right, Riley Mills hasn't thrown an interception yet, so it was an early fumble. But since then, they've played really clean football, and they've come out and been a pretty good football team. So when you look at this Duke football team, like I said, they're a talented football team. They're coming out and playing well. As I mentioned before, Mike Elko is now 11-0 as a head coach in games they score first. And they've been pretty balanced this year. I'm going to kind of pull up some things here as you look into it. And offensively, they're averaging 37.3 points per game, which is 28th in the country. They also rank 28th in the country in yards per play at 6.8 and yards per rush at 5.7, which has been greatly aided by their quarterback, Riley Leonard, who is second on the team in rushing yards at 238. He's only 20 yards behind Jordan Waters, but he averages 8.2 yards per rush. And Jordan Waters, their lead tailback, averages 6.6 yards per play. They are 16th in the country in fewest tackles for loss allowed per game. They also ranked 4th in the country in fewest sacks allowed. When you look at this Clemson or this Duke offense, their offensive line is not really super talented outside of their left tackle, Graham Barton. He's a very good football player, one of the best tackles in college football. But it's a big group for the most part. Jake Hornerbrook's not super big at 6'5", 300 at right tackle. Their center's 6'3", 297, pretty stout kid. Their guards are big at 314 on the left side, 320 on the right side. Graham Barton is 6'5", 314. But they are veterans. 4 of those guys are graduates, and then Barton is a senior. So it's a very experienced Duke offense. Riley Leonard's a junior. Your main 3 running backs are Jordan Waters, who's their leading rusher, is a graduate. Jalen Coleman's a graduate. Jaquez Moore's a junior. Your receivers are older players. Jalen Calhoun is a redshirt senior. Samir Hagens is a redshirt sophomore, so he's a third-year player. Jordan Moore is a junior. Your primary backups are both seniors. So this is a very experienced Duke offense. It's not an explosive Duke offense. When you look at the things they do offensively, have a very mobile quarterback that can make plays in the pass game with his legs. He's also a guy that can come out and he'll do a lot of design runs. They'll do power read. They'll do quarterback counter. They'll do quarterback outside zone. They'll do read zone where he'll pull and keep it. So he's going to present some huge problems for the Notre Dame defense this weekend. They're going to have to be prepared for him. There's no doubt about that. When you look at the other things they do, like run game wise, they're not a downhill running team because they're not a real kick your butt type of offensive line. They're more sound and kind of lean on you a little bit. They do a lot of outside zone, a lot of stretch, mid zone, misdirection, counters and things like that, which I think fits what they do with the quarterback really well, because if I can get you moving this way and I'm going to do something with my quarterback, whether it's an RPO or I'm going to pull and keep it backside, it can present some problems for my defense. There's no question about it. Do a lot of things with their running backs. As I said, they're going to run them quite a bit. Their top 2 backs have rushed for over 400 yards. So their top 2 backs are over 100 yards per game so far this season. They average actually 110.5 yards per game. The 2 of them, the Jordan Waters averages 6.6 yards per carry. Jaquez Moore averages 5.3. They've rushed for 9 touchdowns so far. And then you add the running element that Riley Leonard brings to the table, and you've got a really impactful situation. But they also would use their backs out of the backfield. Their backs have 7 catches on the season, but their 7 catches have gone for 122 yards. They're over, so it's 122 divided by 7. There's some big plays in there, 17.4, and a lot of that was against Clemson. And they did some really creative things with their backs out of the backfield against Clemson that created some big play opportunities in that game. Jordan Waters, for example, had 3 catches for 46 yards out of the backfield against Clemson, and that was obviously an impactful part of what they do. And then Jaquez Moore had 1 catch for 28 yards out of the backfield against Clemson. So they're going to have some of that kind of creative stuff for Notre Dame as well. You can be sure of that, especially as much as Notre Dame blitzes. The thinking is going to be, if you can find ways to get your backs out and you catch Notre Dame in a blitz, you've got a chance of breaking something big. Their pass game is very much a short design pass game. They don't have very big receivers. They're 6 foot, 5'11" across the board. As I said before, Samir Hagens, who's a starter, 5'10", 185. Jalen Calhoun is 5'11", 191. Jordan Moore, 6 foot, 195. Their backups are 5'9", 173, 5'11", 190. And then they got one kid who's 6'2", and he's caught 2 passes on the season. Their tight end has 9 catches for 108 yards. They will use him at times over the middle, especially. He's caught 3 passes in each of the last 2 games, but their pass game is built around the short to intermediate stuff. And I've got some, when you talk about just like comparing them to Notre Dame and then, kind of what Notre Dame has done. If you look at Sam Hartman compared to Riley Leonard, and I'm using Pro Football Focus data because I've charted Notre Dame, but I haven't charted Duke. So it would be hard to get a consistent read on that. But if you look at Notre Dame on the season, 32.1% of Notre Dame's pass attempts on the season have been on throws that are 10 yards or more. That's 32.1. Duke, for example, is 22.4. So it's a much bigger difference. But even then, the intermediate numbers are similar. Duke's actually and this is number of attempts. This is the percentage per attempts by the starting quarterback. So Riley Mills has attempted 90 passes. Only 10 of them have gone 20 yards or more past the line of scrimmage. Sam Hartman has attempted 105 passes this year. It's only 15 more, but he's got double the attempts of 20 yards or more. He's got 23 attempts in the intermediate, which is 10 to 19, compared to 19 for Duke. So Duke actually has attempted that 10 to 19 a decent amount. It's still their third highest usage, but only 4.5% of their throws this season, of their completions, I should say, have been greater than that. So what I just gave you, the numbers I just gave you was the number of completion percentage. The attempt percentage for Notre Dame is 40.9. 40.9 of their attempts have been 10 yards or more. 19% have been 20 yards or more. Duke is only at 32.2% on 10 or more, and only 11% of their throws are 20 or more. 48.9% of their throws are between 0 to 9, compared to 43.8 for Notre Dame, and 18.9% of their throws are behind the line of scrimmage, at or behind the line of scrimmage, compared to 15.2 for Notre Dame. So, Duke is at a much, much higher rate of the short, quick game. And what their design is, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get guys into space, force missed tackles. That's something they did very well against Clemson. Get guys the ball in space, crossers, snag routes, hitches, options, where, hey, if you can get it in space, catch it against his own, or even man, make one guy miss and get yards after the catch. Those are things that Duke is trying to do with their wide receivers. And they've had success with it so far. They're not a team that's going to look to throw the ball. They don't want to throw the ball a bunch. They want to be kind of chain movers, or good gains on first downs, and then maybe catch you on a big play or two. But they're really going to be a team that just tries to get into a nice rhythm with Kevin Johns as their coordinator. They're not a team that's really going out there looking to find a lot of, a ton of big play opportunities as far as down the field. Where they want to get you into big play opportunities is using their using their route combinations to get somebody free, they run some mesh and some rub concepts in an attempt to try to get somebody free on a cross, or run guys off and then have a running back on a wheel with a crosser coming backside, thinking, well, if we can isolate that backside defender, if he runs with the wheel, maybe we can get a guy coming across on the cross. Maybe if they're blitzing, we catch them where there's going to be a wheel route. They did that to Clemson twice, where they caught Clemson in a blitz, just threw a little quick swing pass on an empty release out of the backfield and caught Clemson on a big play in the pass game. So that's something they've been very successful with offensively. I really like what they do offensively. They don't have elite talent at the skill positions. It's good. It's not elite. And so they don't ask those guys to be elite. They do things schematically to let them get into space, let them go make plays, after the catch. Those are things they're good at, and they play to that. They're not big. They're not burners. So they don't say, hey, let's run a million post routes and go routes and things like that. So I really like what they do defensively or offensively. Defensively, obviously, Duke is a much different team. They rank 4th in the country in scoring defense, 16th in total defense, 5th in yards per play. They have a really good pass defense so far statistically. Now, part of that is similar to what my criticism of Notre Dame has been in recent weeks, which is, what we talked about with Notre Dame going into the Ohio State game is, we really don't know just how good Notre Dame's defense is because they haven't played a good offense yet. And that's true of Duke as well. They have not played a very good offense so far, and they definitely haven't played a very good passing offense so far. I mean, if you look at Clemson right now, Clemson currently ranks 37th in the country in passing yards at 275, but that's inflated by a 405-yard performance against Charleston Southern. They were 209 against Duke, 204 against Florida Atlantic, and 283 against Florida State, but they only averaged 7.4 yards per attempt against Florida State, 6.2 against Florida Atlantic, and 4.9 against Duke. So very inflated by playing a team that just isn't very good. If we're being honest about it, Northwestern ranked 66th in the country in passing offense, and then UConn ranks 116th in the country in passing offense. So they, like Notre Dame, they hadn't played a good team. Now, Notre Dame answered their challenge against Ohio State very well. Duke now gets their chance to answer that challenge against Notre Dame and see if they can have similar success. Their secondary, I like. They've got a deep secondary. They play several kids. Their corners are good players. It's the best secondary they've had probably since that, I think 16, so 17. I'm trying to remember what year it was, but Duke had a season 5-6 years ago under David Cutcliffe where they had a really nice secondary. They had they had Mark Gilbert, they had the Waters kid. They had a really good secondary. And this secondary is pretty good. They got Al Blades Jr. transferred in from Miami. They have another kid that transferred in from Texas A&M, came with Mike Elko. So they've done some really good things. Red zone defense has been a big part of it. They've done a really nice job keeping teams off the board. Really disruptive in the pass game. They're not a super disruptive team overall like Notre Dame. They only rank 51st in the country in tackles for loss. They are 77th in sacks. They're not a very good third down defense so far. They've given up 98%. They rank 98th in the country in third down defense because they're going up 43.1% on the season. That's not great. But they've forced a lot of turnovers, and they're very good once they get into the red zone. And those are the areas where I think they've been a pretty good football team this year. And their rush defense is solid. It's not great, but it's solid. Clemson went for 213, but their next three opponents went for 126, 104, and 89. So they've done a pretty good job defending the run the last couple weeks. And even Northwest, even the Clemson game, they made Clemson work, for their yards. And so I like what they've done so far, but they haven't really played anybody that's necessarily a real dynamic running team outside of Clemson. And as I said, Clemson went for over 200 yards against them. Clemson on the season right now is averaging 199 yards per game. So they actually went over their average against Duke. They went for 274 against Charleston Southern, but they were only at 163 against Florida Atlantic and only 146 against Florida State. So they haven't been a great rushing team this year, but they were able to have success against Duke, running the football against Duke this season. And Will Shipley went for 114 yards in that game. It's the only 100-yard game he's had so far. So run defense can be had. They have a good defensive line. We've talked all summer about Dwayne Carter. Obviously, Jamion Franklin plays for them. He's one of their starters. They've got an Aeneas Peebles, is a short 286-pound kid that comes off the bench. Carter and Franklin provide some size. Their backups come in with some quickness. R.J. Oben, who's the son of former NFL offensive tackle Roman Oben, is one of their starting ends. They play a lot of guys up front. They're not real big. Like I said, Franklin and Carter have some good size. Their linebackers are good-sized kids, good players, good inside players, smart kids. But I really like their secondary. And they ask their safeties to do a lot, which we all remember from Mike Elko. That's kind of a Mike Elko thing. Coach Elko, who was the safeties coach at Notre Dame and I believe at Texas A&M as well, whereas Al Golden's defense is very linebacker driven, Mike Elko's defense is very safety driven. And I include their rover in that conversation when I start talking about their safeties because their rover is more of a true nickel. He's a 5'10", 180-pound kid, Brandon Johnson. But if you actually look at their numbers on the season, even though he's, again, like I said, he's 5'10", 180 pounds, he's been pretty disruptive for Duke this year. It was kind of interesting when I was breaking down their stats before I broke down their game. Brandon Johnson, their nickel, leads their defense at 5'10", 180 pounds with 4.5 tackles for loss. so far on the season, and only one of those are sacks. So he's very aggressive. You guys remember the defense that he plays. Very aggressive guy. Uh, Asks his safeties to do a lot of. They mix up their coverages. They'll show two and roll. They'll start off in one and then roll two or just completely invert. They'll do a lot of robbing. They let their corners be aggressive outside, but they don't put them in a lot of man situations. They kind of use them somewhat similarly to how NC State uses their corners. But their safeties are very active, and they allow them to really attack the football. And so I really like what Duke does on the back end of their defense. They rank actually 12th in the country in passes defensed this season. They have 20 pass breakups on the season in 4 games, which ranks 10th. But see, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the teams ranked ahead of them, and one of the teams that's tied with them have played one more game. So like Notre Dame right now ranks ahead of Duke in passes defensed and passes broken up, but they've played one more game. So right now, for example, Notre Dame has 26 passes defensed, which is more than Duke, who has 24. And Notre Dame has 21 pass breakups compared to Duke's 20. But Notre Dame did that in 5 games. Duke has only done that in 4. So they've been a very disruptive defense this year, even though they don't get a ton of sacks and tackles for loss. Like we saw from Mike Elko when he was at Notre Dame, they do a lot of things to be disruptive with the football. There's no doubt about it. And so it's one of the things I like about him as a coach. And, you're going to see Duke be very, very good in that regard. I mean, and if you guys remember correctly, Julian Love in his one season with Mike Elko had 20 pass breakups. If you guys remember that, he was outstanding that year. And I think tied a Notre Dame record with passes defensed. That was 2017 with Mike Elko leading the charge. So in that year, they had 52 pass breakups, which is a jump of 16 from the year before in that 2017 season under Mike Elko. So your Duke's doing a lot of the same things we saw them do for Notre Dame. Very safety oriented. Let their defense kind of attack, but do so soundly. They'll bring some pressures, but they're not. They do some really good kind of like overload aside, but not necessarily overload. 6 guys. They're not going to put their corners in a lot of cover 0, cover 1. They'll do a lot of things like that. So I like what Duke does. It's a fun team to break down because they've got good talent. It's not elite talent, but it's good talent. But they're a very well-coached football team. They play hard. They play with a lot of confidence. They've got a quarterback they believe in. They've got a secondary that's very active and very aggressive and very confident. They think they're very good, and they back it up what they do on the field. And that's a big thing. Is it's one thing to come out and think that you're good and kind of have some of that false bravado, but Duke backs it up. They play with a lot of confidence, a lot of swagger. Really like what I've seen from this Duke football team so far this year. And just a quick look at from a recruiting ranking, I had Ryan put this together. This is what I always say. Recruiting rankings don't always tell you the whole story. If you look at Duke's starting lineup, they've got one guy that was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. That's it. That was Al Blades Jr., who transferred in from another school. They don't have a 4-star guy in their rotation on defense or on offense. Riley Leonard was a 3-star recruit coming out of high school. Their highest ranked player on defense outside of Al Blades was the number 517 player in the country. Their highest ranked guy on offense was where we at 475 in the starting lineup. That's it. One guy that ranked inside the top 500, and they just beat Clemson, and they are 13-4 in the last 2 years under Mike Elko. They've lost by a combined 16 points. It just goes to show you can find talented players all over the place. They're not all 4- and 5-star players, but if you have a coach that can instill confidence, teach kids how to play the game, you don't have to run a crazy exotic defense. If your kids know how to play, you've got good athletes, and they're disciplined, and they know where to be. And that's what Duke is. And it also shows what you can have when you've got a really good quarterback, like Notre Dame has seen this year with Sam Hartman. When you've got a good quarterback, you can turn things around in a hurry. And that's been a big part of Duke's success, has been, as much as I love Mike Elko and the job he's done, and he's done a great job. Don't get it wrong here. I love the job Mike Elko has done. but his job has been made, the transition's been made a little bit quicker, in my opinion, because of the presence of Riley Leonard. That's been a big part of it. And so I really like what they've done at Duke. So that's going to do it for that breakdown so far. We're going to just answer a couple quick questions here before we get out of here. Go Irish for the super chat. Thank you very, very much. Go Irish. My brother, smart guy, knows football, is convinced the Duke game is trivial. He keeps saying it's Duke. Even said, what's the big deal? Are we playing at Cameron or something? Do you agree? I wholeheartedly disagree. You don't play the name on a jersey. You don't play, the past. You play the team that's in front of you. You're talking about a football team the last 2 years that has gone, as I said, has gone 13-4 the last 2 years. You're talking about a football team the last 2 years that has lost those 4 games by combined 16 points. Notre Dame has had Notre Dame has had 5 losses now in the last 2 years, and I can promise you their combined losses is by more than 16 points. Notre Dame had 2 losses last year by double figures alone. They had 2 losses just against Ohio State and USC that were by 11 points alone. Now, Notre Dame's not out there getting blown out. Their other losses were by 5, 2, and 3, but it just kind of puts into context how good Duke has been the last couple of years. One of their losses last year was to a really good Kansas team. This is before Jalen Daniels got hurt. They lost by a field goal to Georgia Tech. They lost by a field goal to North Carolina. They lost to 2 points at Pitt. They beat Sam Hartman and Wake Forest last year, 34-31. And again, we're talking about a team that went 3-9 the year before, and they just came off of a win this year where the closest game they've had so far through 4 games this year is 24 points against a Northwestern team that literally scored a touchdown in the last minute and a half of the game to make it a 24-point game. So this is a good football team, and anyone who says it's not is simply just going by the name and the reputation. They're not actually looking at the football team. They're not looking at the quality of the opponent. And this is what can happen sometimes with fans who don't really follow college football. They say, well, that wasn't a big win. You beat Duke. Well, who knows what Duke's going to be at the end of the year? I'm not saying Duke's going to lose to Notre Dame and then run the table and go 11-1. I don't know what Duke is going to do. But Duke's a quality football team. They've got a tough schedule coming up. They play NC State. They have a bye week after Notre Dame. Then they play NC State, at Florida State, at Louisville, home against Wake, at Carolina, at Virginia, home against Pitt. They'll probably not be 11-1 or 12-0. That's probably not who Duke is going to be this year. But this is a good football team. And it would not surprise me at all if Duke matches their win total from last year, but does so in the regular season, because they went 8-4 last year in the regular season, and they beat Temple, beat Northwestern, beat North Carolina A&T, beat Virginia, beat Miami, Florida at Miami, 45-21, beat BC on the road, beat Virginia Tech, beat Wake Forest, and then beat UCF in a bowl game. And then this year they've beaten Clemson, Lafayette, Northwestern, and UConn. So this is a quality football team. Now, is it a football team Notre Dame should beat? Of course, absolutely. This is a game Notre Dame should win. But if Notre Dame wins it, they're going to have to earn it. And if Notre Dame wins convincingly, they will have really had to have earned it, because this isn't something that has ever happened to Duke under Mike Elko. And when you go look at the games they lost, they were competitive and all. It wasn't like they were down 30 and then scored a bunch of points to make it closer than it was. That's not what's happened here. That's not what Duke has done. So I really like the job they've done. And if Notre Dame wins this game, it's a really good bounce back. If they're able to win this game convincingly, it's a great bounce back. But right now the whole goal is just go win the game. Right, that's going to be the key. Go win the game. And that's what we need to see. We need to see from Notre Dame this weekend. But this is a good football team in Duke. I'm not going to try to convince y'all this is a potential playoff team, and this is the most talented team. No, I'm not going to do all that for you. This is a team that Notre Dame should beat because they have better talent. But you're going to have to play well. You're going to have to be focused. You're going to have to be locked in, and you're going to have to you're going to have to bring it, because Duke is going to bring it. I can assure you of that. It is interesting, even though Notre Dame played Duke in 2020. It's obviously a very different football team. But Sam Hartman's actually played against against Duke the last 2 years. Last year they lost to Duke 34-31. Sam Hartman went 26 of 42 for 347 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. And then in 2021, Sam Hartman against Duke, a not very good Duke team, as I said before, but he still went out there, won 45-7. went 24 of 37 for 402 yards, 3 touchdowns. He also had 2 rushing touchdowns. So it's one of his two 5-touchdown game, or one of his several 5+ touchdown games in his career. But even last year against a good, a spry Duke team, their defense is a lot better this year than it was last year. Duke's is anyway, but even last year, their defense was solid. They only gave up 22 points a game last year. 31 points against Wake Forest was a pretty good output last year by that Deacon defense, or that Deacon offense, against a pretty solid Duke defense. So I'm gonna have to disagree a little bit with your brother on that one. And if he breaks, I'd be curious. You know what I would do? I would challenge him to say, hey, how much film have you watched? Have him watch him. If he says I haven't really watched some highlights, just have him watch them. I'd be curious what he says after that. Let's go to the next one. This is from I'm not quite sure how to say that. I'm not going to try, but I appreciate the super chat. It says, worried about the offense, no deep ball, conservative play call, no RPO. They ran some RPOs, but not a ton. I would like to see more. Our coach is too afraid of error to trust players. Our players not doing their job. Our Hartman and Estime used to their ability. Last game has me concerned. Look, the last game was not good, and they got to play better. I talked about that. They're going to have to play better than against Duke. They're going to have to find ways to get the football down the field. And I believe your super chat came in before I went over a lot of this, so I'll let some of that stand. But look, you've got to be willing to say, as a fan, hey, I'm going to put more weight on the game against Ohio State than I am the previous games, because that's what the standard by which you're judged at Notre Dame. But you also can't just ignore the other games either. So, it's who is Notre Dame? Are they the team that we saw just light the scoreboard up against these teams? Are they the team that struggled to put the ball in the end zone against Ohio State? But even within that, Notre Dame moved the ball in Ohio State. Like last year, and Notre Dame couldn't even move the ball in Ohio State. They had that first big play of the game, right? They went for 54 yards in the first play of the game against Ohio State last year. And then the rest of the game, they only finished with 253 yards the entire game. So they had 199 yards after that first play. And Notre Dame against Ohio State this year was much more effective. They weren't great, but they were better. I think their longest play of the day was like 28 yards. So they weren't ripping off a bunch of big plays, but they had their fair share of chunk plays, which helped them get points on the board. So they've got to be better than they were against Ohio State. But it's really about finishing. Whereas in the past, it was like last year against Ohio State, you were just manhandled. You were manhandled on the perimeter. You were manhandled in the trenches. You were just manhandled the whole game. This year, you were the aggressor. You were the team that was leaning on them in the second half. You were the team as Notre Dame that was starting to gash them in the second half. As I mentioned last night, Notre Dame had, 123 yards rushing in the second half against Ohio State, 123 in the second half. And then they had 126 going to that last series. They had that -5 by Hartman, and it was 124 going into the last series on, I think, 24 carries. And so, they were physical. They started doing some things. I don't know that I'm willing to say they don't trust certain players. Sometimes the flow of the game, the quarterback doesn't get the ball where it needs to go to. Sometimes it's, the defense made a good call. Sometimes it's, a guy doesn't those things all happen. Are there snaps where guys aren't doing their job? Sure. There's snaps where Ohio State's guys didn't do their job. A lot of it, though, was you got to sometimes tip your cap to the kids at Ohio State and say, that's a pretty good play. The screen call. Here's one thing I'll say. I don't think that Notre Dame was conservative on that last series. The whole complaint that we all have is that they didn't just run the ball the last 4 plays. They just run the ball and run the clock out. Well, Notre Dame said, no, we're gonna try to go for a big play here. And the reason you put Jeremiah Love in the game there is because you're trying to catch them and rip off another big play. The reason you run that screen there is because you think you can get a chunk of those yards back. The conservative thing to do on that last series would have been to run the ball. And then you talk about conservative pass plays. Well, I think there's some fairness to that, but some of it was the quarterback's got to let the ball go. There's a couple opportunities where the quarterback's got to let the ball go. The receiver's got to do a better job getting off the line. So there's also some execution stuff that needs to get improved upon as well. So Look, it was not a good game from the offense. They showed some potential. They got to finish better, and they didn't finish well. And you've got to clean that stuff up. But it's not, to me, it's not something to me that I'm like going to say I'm just going to ignore all the first 4 games and, oh no, the offense is going to suck the rest of the year. Not they're playing good teams. It's, look, they did not play well. Learn from it, build upon it, and get back to being that really dynamic offense that you were before. Got a super chat from Little Guy 131. How do you balance run to open the pass versus stick with the run because it's working and grinding the opponent down? I'll be honest, I don't have a problem, Little Guy, with Notre Dame's balance so far run pass. I think they've done a nice job of keeping teams off balance. I think they've come out early, try to establish a run, get teams sucked in, and then they've had different things that they've tried to do. Throwing the ball. I mean, you look at NC State, they came out early trying to run it, then found some shots down the field. Central Michigan, they came out, run, bomb, touchdown. So I think they've done a nice job of balancing there. I think they found a good spot there. I think you've got to take what the defense gives you. I would like to see more RPOs. I expected a lot more RPOs from Jared Parker, a lot more. And I wonder if maybe that's something that maybe Coach Freeman doesn't want him to do. Maybe now that he's the OC, he doesn't do it as much. I don't know the answer to that. But I think that's a way where you could help find a little bit more run-pass balance as well. I don't know if they're not doing as much RPOs because they're so much more 12 and 13 personnel driven. I don't know the answer to that. But I think that would be something that needs to be done a little bit more in order to allow Notre Dame to protect their run game a little bit more. And maybe give some more chances to Chris Tyree and, Tobias Merriweather and Jaden Greathouse and some of those guys to be able to maybe get some balls in space and have some bigger plays. That's something I'd like to see more of. Absolutely. But I honestly think that they're doing a nice job of that. The whole thing is everything they did up until that last series was designed to, you're wearing this team out. It's not just about running it 50 times. That's not the only way to wear a team out. It can be going tempo. It can be throwing the football. I mean, it's just depending on how you're throwing the football. There's a lot of different things you can do. And they were starting to wear Ohio State down. And that's why I would have liked to see them go back to Audric. Or even if you're going to run Jeremiah Love, do something that's a little bit more certain as opposed to this, fake here and go over here and do all that kind of stuff, which you hadn't really done. I would have said, hey, look, if you want to give it to Jeremiah, if you want to give it to Jadarian and just ride that inside zone, ride power, ride counter, whatever it is, just give it to him. That would be a big thing for me. Mike Farino with a super chat. This is one of our resident Ohio State fans. How's it going, Brian? It's Brian with a Y. Come on, Ohio State guy, get that right. I'm kidding, obviously. How's it going, Brian? What is the sentiment around Notre Dame right now after the loss? Is the team down after the loss, or are they using it as a springboard? I think you'll win by 2 scores personally. I sure hope so. I mean, like I said, Duke's a good football team. I sure hope they can win like that. Here's what it comes down to for me, Mike. I think this is a different reaction from Notre Dame fans as a whole than I've seen in a long time. And here's what I mean by that. You look, every fan base has their irrational people. What's funny is I've talked to several people that are from Ohio that are like, look, with 5 minutes left in the game, the sports talk channels are getting all these calls about fire Ryan Day and Ryan Day sucks and get rid of him and all this other kind of stuff. And then they go out and win the game. And it's Ryan Day, say whatever dumb thing you want to say after a game. We love you. You're the man. We got your back, even though they wanted to fire him in the middle of the fourth quarter. But everyone's got that part of the fan base, right? I mean, you've got it. Notre Dame's got it. We've all got it. When I evaluate, it's more of like, what's the whole saying? What are the people that I know that are rational? What are the people that I know that live and breathe it, but don't act crazy after a game? And the reaction has been, for the first time in a long time, it's like, man, you were the better team that day and you didn't get it done. So it's a frustration as opposed to a disappointment. Where in the past it was, man, we almost beat Florida State. I'm disappointed because we almost pulled off that upset, but Florida State's better than we are. We played, out of our minds, and, we just couldn't stop that guy or do this. Referees this, that, whatever. It's always been a disappointment, but man, what a great effort, But there was a lot of pride in losing to USC the way they did in 05. Heartbreak for sure, because you thought you had the game won, but it was kind of like they were better than you, and you played your butts off and hung with them. and you should be proud of that. Even though, man, I'm gut punched because they lost. This game is a little different. It's more of a frustration. Like, man, that's a game you shouldn't lose. That's a game you should have won. And then of course all the past creeps in and all that. So I think there's a frustration with it. And now we enter a bit of an unknown, Mike, which is, how is the team going to respond to it? We don't know. I don't think the team is down. That's not who this team is. I think they'll bounce back and at least play solid football against Duke. I don't think that we're going to see a lot of carryover into Duke. Now, that's my opinion. We need to see it. But I think there's enough leadership and experience in this team that as long as the locker room stays together, I think we'll see them rally back from an emotional standpoint. Well, that's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about, can you clean up your mistakes? Can you tackle better? Can you play more discipline? Can you make the schematic adjustments you need to make to play at a higher level? That's more of a concern for me than, are they going to respond, emotionally? Are they down? I mean, this is a very veteran football team. I don't expect them to go in the tank emotionally as a team. If that happens, anything can happen. I'll be surprised. It's about, can you clean up the mistakes on the coaching level and then on the player level, especially on the coaching level. Can you make the adjustments? You now know you have 5 games now. You played a really good football team, so you know who you are now. Okay. You're not changing who you are, your philosophy, but what tweaks are you going to make schematically, personnel wise, rotation wise, all those type of things to say. And then also with your calls, with your adjustments, it's not throw this out and do something new, but within who we are, can we make some adjustments to make sure that the next time you're in that situation against that kind of team, you're executing the way you need to. And that's where Notre Dame is at now at this point in time. Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. Coach, any chance I can meet you at the Duke game? I would love to, Charlie, but I actually had to cancel my trip this week. I'm working on, getting one of my guys to replace me, but I don't really care to talk about it too much, but I'm dealing with some health stuff right now that's making me not going to be able to travel this weekend, but I'll be good. Of course, any prayers are always appreciated, but I'll be good. So I actually won't be able to go this weekend to the game. But soon, my man, soon, I hope to be able to meet you guys. And we will be having a tailgate at USC, by the way. I do plan on going to Louisville because I'll actually be driving to Louisville. And that's a much easier trip to make. And so I will be there. And Vince will be as well, if you plan on being there. Real quick here from, I'm not sure what that says. But what's going on with Nolan Ziegler? He has been with the team for a while. He is working his way back. He was with the team on the field the last couple home games. And the expectation that I've been told by some sources is that it won't be too long before, I believe he's actually back practicing this week, and that there's a chance he will be back on the field at some point in time this year as a practice for sure soon. Whether or not he's missed too much time to work into the rotation, that all remains to be seen. But he's doing a lot better from what I'm told, which is very, very good news. Very, very good news. All right. So that's, I think, the last. I think there might have been one other question that I wanted to get to. All right, here's a couple. Coleman Smith says, Brian, at the current landscape of the 23 season, if we run the table, what needs to happen for us to make the playoff? Look, just continued chaos. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. I mean, there's not a ton of undefeated teams left in some of these power conferences, and in the conferences where there are a lot of undefeated teams at the top. For example, the Big Ten has several undefeated teams left. Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and Maryland. Four teams in the Big Ten are undefeated. They're all in the same division. Only one of them can end the season undefeated. One. That's it. They can't have multiple undefeated teams in the Big Ten. The Big 12 has only 3 undefeated teams left: Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. And Texas plays both of them. Texas actually plays Kansas this weekend. So one of those is going to be undefeated. And then they play Oklahoma the next week. And there's a chance that there could only be one undefeated team left, or none. at that point in time. So you never know. Like, let's say Kansas upsets Texas this weekend, and then Texas beats Oklahoma, and then UCF knocks off Kansas. Or let's say Texas beats Kansas, and then the next week Oklahoma comes out, and they beat Texas, and then Oklahoma this weekend plays Iowa State, and they get knocked off. I don't think that's going to happen, but Oklahoma still has to play at Kansas this year, at BYU, and playing Texas and Dallas. So continued chaos. You look at other conferences, the SEC right now, I believe the SEC only had, let me find the SEC. They only have 2 undefeated teams left. No, 3 undefeated teams left in the SEC. That's it. And they're all in the East: Georgia, Kentucky, and Missouri. So they all play each other. There can only be one undefeated team in the SEC at the end. And look, one of Alabama and LSU is going to have a second loss. One of Alabama, Ole Miss just lost to Bama. They still got to play Auburn, A&M, and LSU. LSU has to still play all those teams. They still got to play Bama, still got to play A&M, still got to play Auburn. So LSU, I believe, also has to play Florida. So there's a lot of football left, and they just need to kind of what's happened to keep happening. The conference that could be a problem to me, the way that they're playing right now, is just because there's 5 undefeated teams, is the Pac-12. But again, they all got to play each other. And so when you look at like USC is undefeated right now, Oregon's undefeated right now, Utah is undefeated right now, Washington and Washington State are both undefeated right now. USC still has to play Oregon. They still have to play Washington. They still have to play Utah. So 3 of the undefeated teams USC still has to play. Oregon still has to play Washington, Washington State, Utah, and USC. And I think I forgot to mention, Oregon. That's right, because Oregon State lost this weekend. They lost to Washington State this weekend. Utah still has to play at Oregon State Friday. They got to play at USC, home against Oregon, at Washington. Washington State, who's been really good so far, they got to play at UCLA this weekend, at Oregon, at Arizona State, at Washington, home against Colorado, and home against Arizona. So, and then of course Washington, a team that I'm a little bit more concerned about. They're home against Oregon, home against Utah. They've got to play, and then home against Washington State, and they got to play at USC and at Oregon State. So, what Notre Dame needs is to, number one, you kind of want USC to knock off a bunch of those undefeateds, because if Notre Dame goes 11-1, they'll beat USC, and then hopefully USC can maybe beat a lot of those teams. You want the SEC to beat each other up, and look, if Georgia runs the table, or Kentucky runs the table, or Missouri, the 3 undefeated teams left, that's fine. Because here's the thing. It's if the SEC East wins the SEC title, it's impossible. It's impossible. And looking at the schedule, for there to be a 1-loss team from the West. It's impossible. Because they all got to play each other. And then if one of those teams beats all the others, let's say LSU runs the table, beats all the others, if they lose to Georgia, they got 2 losses. So there's a lot of this this chaos that needs to happen. And so if you're Notre Dame, you need that to keep happening. So, Ryan and I have talked about it during the summer. We've talked about it recently. There's going to be a lot of chaos in college football this year. Notre Dame just needs that to keep happening. And as long as they handle their business, I'm not at all concerned about them being left out. You say, hey, what if Florida State runs the table? What if they run the table? Then an ACC team gets in. Guess what? The last 2 times that Notre Dame's made the college football playoff, an ACC team got in. Clemson in 2018 and Clemson in 2020. So it's not like Notre Dame and the ACC are competing for a spot, and Notre Dame can't get in if there's an undefeated ACC. They can't get in if there's an undefeated ACC and an undefeated Big 12 and an undefeated Pac-12 and an undefeated Big 10 and an undefeated SEC. And some of those teams, they're going to have a hard time getting in if all of them have 1 loss. They need the right teams to lose, and they need some of those teams to lose convincingly. Look, I know that some of these clowns in the national media will say, oh, Notre Dame can't get in, whatever. What I don't understand is, why do you guys complain about the stupidity of these people, but then keep listening? But And then I have to listen to it because people come and talk to me about it. But here's the deal. If Notre Dame beats USC, if Notre Dame beats Clemson, if Notre Dame beats Duke and Louisville, runs the table, and their only loss is a 3-point home loss to Ohio State, they're going to be really hard to keep out of the postseason this year. I just think that they will. And that's where it's at. Now, what you can't what will hurt Notre Dame, here's what will hurt Notre Dame. Ohio State runs the table, loses to Michigan or Penn State, who runs the table, and that team is 13-0, and Ohio State's 11-1, and they've got a road win over Notre Dame, and there's a undefeated, let's just say like Georgia's undefeated. Let's say Florida State's undefeated or 12-1, and they've got a good loss. And let's say Penn State or Michigan run the table in the Big Ten, and Michigan and Ohio State's only loss is to that team, and they beat Notre Dame, Notre Dame's going to have a hard time getting in. But that just hasn't been the case in most seasons. And so that's why I say if Notre Dame runs the table, the odds of them being left out is just not real strong, in my opinion. It's not. So but right now, honestly, I just want to see how they play against Duke. I do. I'm not really I'll answer your guys' questions. Totally fine, Coleman. No problem with that. But I'm just saying, like, for me personally, I'm not overly concerned about thinking about the postseason right now because it doesn't matter. They've got to go out there and start racking up some wins, and it starts this weekend against Duke. So that's it for that one. I will be back tomorrow, guys. 1:00 tomorrow is when I'll start my midweek rundown. I'll talk about some of the unique aspects of this game, maybe dive a little bit more into what we need to see from this Notre Dame football team. I'll have some analysis to go over. I'll talk a little bit of recruiting breakdown, some things that I've seen from some of these, from where Notre Dame is, and maybe have a couple of recruiting topics. Haven't zeroed in specifically what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. If there's something you guys really want me to talk about, put it on the message board. Let me know what you guys think. And some of it may be intriguing, and I may want to talk about it. So definitely do that. Before you get out of here, do me a favor. I would greatly appreciate if you guys hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family. If you have Notre Dame friends and family, if you have friends and family who are college football fans, share the podcast. We welcome all comers as long as you should be respectful and like to talk and use good arguments and good data and like talking football. You can be a fan of somebody else, and I think you'll enjoy this show. So definitely let people know about it. If you haven't done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I'm going to have my breakdowns of the Notre Dame pass game and run game tomorrow. I'll get my defensive breakdown up here soon over the next couple days, and then I got to get caught back up in some other defensive stuff, and I'm starting to do some offensive line breakdowns that I'm hoping to get caught up on over the next couple weeks as well. So there's a lot of that cool stuff coming out, and I'm hoping that I can get some recruiting scoop and some recruiting intel here over the next week or so as well. So and that's all premium only stuff. So definitely check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I know some of you there's been a couple login issues the last couple days. We are aware of that. We're definitely working on that. So if you're experiencing that, just shoot me an email, let me know, and we'll keep working on it and try to figure out what's going on and get that fixed. So thanks for sticking with us. We'll talk to you all again very, very soon. Have a great rest of your night and a great morning tomorrow before you join me again on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.